Whenever I was in jail, I met this guy.
I grew up in rural Texas in the 90s when, among the usually uneventful life here, something had people on edge from Houston to the Rio Grande Valley. One man was terrorizing the railroad track-adjacent communities of Texas, and the rest of the...
Now, mind you, I didn't meet him like I'm friends with you. Hi, would you like a fucking soup? No. I had to transfer him from one cell to another because I was the classification worker in this was Houston. I think it was, what year was that? I think it was 1999, actually. I could be wrong. It might have been 2000-ish. Something like that.
Southern U.S. for that matter, avoiding prosecution at every step of the way. From 1986 to 1999, Angel Maturino Resendez hopped freight trains from Mexico into the U.S. and brutally killed dozens of people near the tracks, and seemingly anyone could be a victim.
Really? That's inappropriate.
Resendez grew up in Mexico in an allegedly abusive household, first traveling to the U.S. illegally sometime in the early 70s, at a time of relatively lax border security.
No, like now.
He was arrested for the first time in 1976 in Michigan and deported back to Mexico, a deportation that was short-lived. Just 3 years later, he was arrested in Florida for his first known violent crime. Resendez had broken into the home of an elderly man and severely beat him, earning him a 20-year prison sentence of which he would serve only 6 years. Resendez would be in and out of prison for much of his life in the U.S. for a variety of offenses. Each time he was deported, he would seek refuge with family in Mexico, and was essentially able to maintain a double life. As far as his family knew, he was an ordinary migrant worker, but his predilection for violence north of the border was already underway. His first known murders occurred in 1986 when he killed 2 drifters outside of San Antonio, a crime that would go unsolved until his confession over a decade later. Because his first few known killings were spread out across the country with no obvious connections, the profile of a rail-hopping serial killer wasn't immediately apparent. He largely kept to groups that were themselves trying to avoid authorities, including drifters who traveled by rail and people in the country illegally, and he committed his crimes sometimes years apart. Between 1991 and 1998, Resendez is known to have killed 6 people, mostly women ranging from 16 to 87. The victims were nearly all near a railroad track when the attacks happened. Many lived within sight of the tracks. At the end of 1997, Resendez attacked a couple walking near the University of Kentucky campus along the railroad tracks, killing the man and leaving the woman for dead. Holly Pendleton is the only known survivor of a Resendez attack. She was brutally assaulted, and nationwide the railroad killer was becoming front-page news. He lay dormant for over a year after this attack before picking up again. Resendez killed an elderly woman in Hughes Springs, Texas, and one in Georgia as his frequency of attacks was increasing. In 1998, Resendez hopped off the tracks in West University Place, a posh Houston enclave. It was here that he killed one of the most high-profile victims, pediatric neurologist Claudia Benton. Benton was a relatively well-known member of Houston's medical community, and murder of this variety was unheard of in Westview. Unlike most of his victims, whose homes were remote and rural, Benton's murder had happened on a quiet suburban street with neighbors just a stone's throw away. Prints left at the scene were matched to a spate of crimes across the country, and the profile of a train-hopping serial killer was solidified. Benton's Jeep was found abandoned near San Antonio, and Texas, along with much of the U.S., was in a fervor. Resendez's crimes were somewhat unusual. His victims were usually bludgeoned with household items, some as innocuous as a statue. He would steal items from many of his victims, including jewelry, which he gave as gifts to unknowing family in Mexico. But burglary seemed a secondary motive. He would often leave valuable and expensive items and opt to take keepsakes instead. After a few months of quiet following Benton's murder, Resendez struck again, this time in Weimar, Texas. It was here that he broke into the parsonage of the United Church of Christ and murdered Norman and Karen Cernick. Their car was found in San Antonio weeks later, and prints were immediately matched to the Benton case. Resendez is increasingly visible in the media, identified and placed on an episode of America's Most Wanted. Police started to look in places Resendez was suspected to be, rail yards, homeless shelters, groups of migrant workers, but were unable to track him down. The biggest mishap of the case happened 1 month after the Weimar murders, when Resendez was arrested by Border Patrol, and even though he was wanted for questioning in connection with several...
You know what I was in jail for? trespassing. Yeah. When I went to the, I fought it myself and someone else because they were trying to make us look like burglars. There was I'll stop this and go to the normal camera. Hello.
There was like 8 of us. We went into a, I guess you would call it a urban legend type of house that everybody knew about because they were orders. They had stuff in this house stacked up 8 foot tall. Basically, it had a line cut through the house. So we went in the window, made a big loop through the house to come out, and there was an old man with a gun there stopping us. We all got arrested. I could have ran and made it. I didn't do it. I stayed. I was arrested. We were all arrested. It was a mess. But when we all went to court, they tried to make it like we'd really done something. Like we were trying to burglarize or do something fucked up, when clearly that was not the case. It was a bunch of kids, and they were supposedly a haunted house too. Oh, it was haunted, all right. So I got that. Now, whenever I didn't win the case, I lost, and for mistake of fact. The mistake of fact was that it was an abandoned house. It appeared to be abandoned by a shitload of shit in there. I don't remember all the details. It's not important. So, I had probation, and when I first went to the probation office, the first time you go to the probation office, they drug test you, and it's like you can have drugs in your system then because you weren't on probation yet. Does that make sense? And I did. I had weed because I smoked weed, obviously. And when I went back to piss test again, which wouldn't have been dirty by that point, the lady said, well, I don't have your paperwork for work. I'm like, yeah, but it's right here. I've had it the whole time. Yeah, but I didn't write it in my book, so that means you didn't have it. I was like, what? What are you saying? She was going to automatically just send me to the boot camp for nothing, you know. She was taking my drug screen, switching it with the one that I had before to get me 3 things that I didn't have, which would have 3-striked me amount, and I'd have had to go to boot camp, which I didn't want to do, so I didn't. So I went home, I packed all my shit, and I moved out here for the first time. And I lived out here and worked for 2 years before I went back and went to the jail. When I got out, I went and worked on the boats. And then I worked there for about a year, maybe a year. And then I met my beautiful, young little wife. And that's the story of that. Of course, there's another story where there was a kid that put their baby in the microwave, and we all came across him in the courtroom in Galveston County. This is a different time for fighting with my wife, because we fucking fought all the time. She's a psycho, and so am I. But somebody just went up to him.
You that dude that put your kid in the microwave. You know what time it is. We all just kicked the shit out of him. Because you know what? You don't put your fucking baby in a microwave.